All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We are from Bridgin. On this webinar today, we'll be talking about how to expand into Spain and give you a lot of uh, details, from generic information about the economy to some details regarding salaries and compensation and work contracts. I'm joined today by Nikita Skokorelis, which is our VP of Customer Success. I'll just let a few more moments so that everyone joins in, and then we will get started.
Hey everyone.
During this session, we do invite you to type in your questions. You'll see on the right of your screen a Q&A icon that is just a little bubble with a question mark on it. So feel free, please, to leave your questions there, and we'll be taking them at the end. As soon as a question might pop up, please do write them down so that don't forget, and we'll take them on at the end. Also, feel free to interact with others on the chat that we also have. Always good opportunity to network a little bit. And again, thank you everyone for joining. Today, we are running this webinar about expanding into Spain. We'll try to keep this more or less about half an hour with a lot of information about Spain, including regulatory information, how to incorporate, employment contracts, salary benchmarks. We'll have a slightly focus on the tech sector because that's where mostly we have experience with as Bridgin, helping foreign tech companies scaling up into Southern Europe. Today we'll be focusing on Spain, but we also support other countries, including Portugal and Italy at the moment, and expanding actually to more countries this year. So we will run through some key information for the first half an hour, more or less, and then we'll be taking questions at the end. So again, feel free to add questions as they might pop up using the icon on the right of your screen or a little icon with a question mark. And I'm joined today by Nikita Skokorelis, VP of Customer Success at Bridgin, myself, Pedro Henriques. I'm the founder and CEO at Bridgin. So hopefully everyone already made the time to join. Hopefully it's not too hot wherever you are. We are going through a bit of a heat wave here in Europe. I won't say in Portugal, actually rain, but yeah, elsewhere in Central Europe seems to be a little bit hot. So hang on tight and hopefully you'll enjoy today's session. So Spain as a tech business destination. The first key thing that you need to know is that Spain currently has actually been growing, and if you look at statistics from European Union and others, that it is actually growing three times faster than Euro area. It might not be super fast, but it is still better. And this is something that has been happening in Spain, also in some extent to Portugal after the COVID pandemic. Both countries, because obviously they benefit from tourism that reopen, they've been now picking up a lot. So there is an interesting momentum across the Iberian Peninsula regarding this. But even a couple of years back, The Economist ranked Spain as one of the best growing economies, both in terms of the growth of the GDP, the performance of the stock market, inflation and unemployment, and even governmental deficit. All things that might feel a little bit not obvious because they weren't all the time. The fact is, we're going through different times and a lot of things obviously happening. The fact that although not mentioned here, but is quite relevant as well, is Spain has a lot of renewables. So all of the pressure regarding energy and obviously the war on Ukraine has pushed energy costs and affect the industrial capacity and the GDP in other European countries, namely Central Europe, has not been affecting Spain. Spain and the Iberian Peninsula as a whole is fully, some days, particularly obviously on the summer when there's more production of solar, they are fully independent and consume only renewable energy for several days on end. And that is something that has been increasing year over year. That actually puts both economies a little bit more resilient to the shocks in terms of energy costs and oils. And we haven't seen in Iberia the hikes. Well, obviously, with the conflict in Hormuz, we've seen oil price going up, but the energy that is used elsewhere in industry has not gone as up as much. The other thing here relevant is that there is ongoing autocratization and a lot of populist movements, and Spain still ranks very good in terms of on the Freedom of World Index with the 91 out of 100 score. It is true as well. If by hearing the news, there's a little bit of some hot cases lately in Spain regarding some corruption, but the reality is the justice system at least is actively persecuting and trying to figure out what it is with that. So I believe all of those do make Spain an interesting country to consider. The other that is relevant is obviously the location. Spain is pretty close. Obviously, shares a border with France and through that with Central Europe. But what does offer different from other countries is the unique connection with a lot of the Americas. Obviously, Spanish is spoke in most of Latam, with the exclusive to being Brazil and then North America that speak English or Portuguese in case of Brazil. And there is also a very tight connection culturally between all of these countries. A lot of companies starting in Latin America, they look at Spain as a good country to enter Europe because they start on a country that shares the same language, and through that they can expand into Europe. And it is important to recall that the European Union does represent a significant market, 450 million citizens, and it is the second largest economy in the world. Arguably fragmented, of course, right? We still have a union of countries, one thing, but then you have the country level with slightly different regulations. But still, it is a unique market, and you can from Spain sell more easily in the same currency to all of the eurozone and without borders to all the European Union. In terms of practicalities, major airports like in Madrid can connect you to major cities, not only in Europe, but in the Americas. So it's also, in that sense, a good entry way. The other thing that is relevant, and maybe some of you already thought about relocating or have relocated to Spain, the reality is the Southern Europe has been always, but accelerating in the last few years, a destination for a lot of people that choose to live in these countries. One of the reasons, obviously, food, the climate, the sun, but also actually the cost of living. And so Spain actually has a cheaper, well, I guess this is a surprise probably to no one, but it's fairly cheaper and cost of living than comparing to London and to Paris and Amsterdam. And in terms of hiring, if you are looking to build, a team and hiring local talent, that does mean that you probably will be able to pay a little bit less. Or, seen in another way, that same salary, that same money can go a longer way in terms of getting a good, decent quality of life in the country. And that's something really important. We recall at Bridgin talking with companies relocating from north of Europe, and we talk with a lot of them. And sometimes one of the reason is some of their employees are looking to take the opportunity of living in a country that has a little bit better lifestyle, a little bit better food, and actually lower cost of living. So this is not negligible fact at all. Now, other reasons to consider is Spain. It is a fairly big country, so with that comes obviously skilled workforce and talent pool. There's a lot of engineering schools, but other roles as well. And Spain, actually, contrary to Portugal, where we also do a lot of webinars talking about, Spain does have an industry that produces and manufactures more stronger than Portugal. So you can have access to a more variety, ability, and skills of your workers. Spain does provide the mature business infrastructure, obviously, courts, banking sector, digital infrastructure. It does get that access to the European market, as we already saw. It is that gateway to Latin America by the shared heritage and language. It can be cost competitive, although as we will see, you probably don't want to think about Spain as rock bottom, low cost price for talent. But when you think all things combined, namely the low cost of living that we just mentioned, it can be quite of an interesting play if you are considering it. The other noteworthy fact here is that, interesting enough, to contrary to other countries, Spain has a capped social security contribution. So these enable companies to pay their employees higher salaries without having that progressive tax burden in terms of social security contributions. It is true that the personal income tax still progresses, obviously, but at least there's this cap on social security that enables and doesn't carry as much employment tax on top of the gross salary. And that's an interesting fact about Spain as well. Moving on here and changing a little bit of gears, I'll just mention, and for anyone that had done sourcing, finding talent, this probably will not be any big news, but the reality is all countries are different. The big thing that you need to do to start, try to build a company or in a talent base is understand who is sourcing for the same talent, who has that talent, does it exist, should you go out to universities, should you hire from existing companies. So it's really important that you have a local partner that can give you that local insight. And that's obviously one of the things we do, but there's other companies doing that. Trying to recruit and build a company from scratch without having any local knowledge is way harder. So we always recommend that you use a partner that has insight, experience into the market. The other important vector here is to have a sourcing strategy that adjusts to the dynamic of the market. Specifically in technology, in tech, in software engineering, the market has been changing a whole lot. The dynamic of a lot of people looking to hire and not enough workers might be changing a little bit with the AI taking some of those jobs. But the reality is that we don't still see job boards work in tech very well. um, no surprises. There's always someone with an AI solution that tries to, automate the outreach to candidates, that tries to, um, evaluate and grade their CV, even doing interviews. We've seen a lot of that. I would take it with a grain of salt because if you want to hire the best, you cannot offer them a subpar candidate experience. If you're trying, putting just an AI interface doing all the interviewing and you don't get people excited about the company's mission and the human aspect out of it, you might not be able to attract and keep engaged candidates, which is actually the pillar number three here. And at the end, and very important, is you need to be competitive, right? So you need to make sure that you understand what is the market, the salary benchmarks for the positions you're looking to hire, that you don't necessarily need to pay, top of the market, but you need to set expectations straight. You can't expect above average quality with average salaries. But also understand that, and particularly in Europe, if you're coming outside Europe, salary is really only a driver until it isn't. People value other things. It could be the fact that they have some remote work. We still see that a lot, although there's a sort of a mandate of return to office, particularly in North America. I do think that a lot of people in Iberia specifically do value the opportunity to work from home. So you might not be able to get into a bidding war if you have something else to offer people to join you. Now, I want to share some numbers and we'll have more key facts for you to be prepared. But starting with this one on the salary benchmarks, just for you to have an idea, what we have here is a couple of positions in the tech sector, the seniority, the salary range, and the delta comparing to the last year. Let me also tell you that again, because of the pandemic, the growth and then the decline of the remote work, the more exposure of countries that were sometimes peripheral, they are now more exposed to the world economy. Salaries have been changing quite a lot, particularly salaries in professions that can be done in remote or nearshore way, and obviously that affects technology specifically. Now, what you can see here is generally a trend up. Interesting enough, a trend up that is more significant in the most senior roles, and this aligns with another trend, which is a lot of the higher, more senior positions are still very hot in the market because even if you want to deploy a swarm of agents to build code for you and do all the other tasks, you do need someone that is responsible for the process, the architecture, essentially managing the engineering. So those roles continue to require or ask a premium in the market, but you see less change in more junior roles. And what you can also see is there is quite a bit of an increase in the first years. If you look down on the table for instance, a full stack developer, 1 to 7 years, the salary can range from 32 to 60, and that's doubling the salary in the first years of the career. And the same similar thing to a front-end developer. This is quite common. What we typically find in Europe is that there is sort of a ceiling in terms of experience. So the salary does progress quite fast, but then it hits a bit of a ceiling, and so it does not continue to grow linearly. Some of the salaries that you might be seeing here, around 60, 80K for the most senior positions, and even above that for the very high seniority, might not be seem like a bargain comparing to other countries in Europe. But what you need to realize is obviously these folks will be, and this is more and more something that is relevant. If you're a company operating in Europe, and given that the macroeconomics that we have and the um, reshoring, companies getting into their spheres of influence. There's a lot of discussion now of Europeans to buy European. And so if you're a company in Europe, it might be relevant for you to keep your teams in Europe because that enables you to make sure that you comply with data protection. You don't flew data to other regions of the world, but that you also don't get in the middle of any trade war that might, apply tax. So far, they haven't, but they might apply to services even. So you never know. Anyway, hopefully this is helpful. We will now move, and I'll let Nikitas cover the next phase a little bit more on the regulatory front regarding employment contracts and other aspects about incorporating. Nikitas?
Yeah. So I guess the key takeaway from these contract types that you see on the screen is most companies will probably offer a permanent contract, which is number one. Yes, there are situations where it might be useful to use the other options available, and this would be a fixed term or even a temporary contract. Um, and to try and give you a bit of an idea why would these be useful, despite having the permanent as the most used or widely used by companies in Spain. It could be that you are on a specific project with a timeline. So then eventually it would make sense to have either a couple of months or even past that in terms of fixed in terms of contract. Or if you're looking at seasonal, for example, temporary contracts could also apply. So there's multiple situations where permanent might not make sense, even though the majority of the cases, this is what employees will ask for. And this kind of ties back with what Pedro was saying. When you're looking at talent, most employees, if they've been working in a Spanish company, this is what they'll probably have. So, if they're going through a new offer, aside from benefits, contract is also something very relevant, and permanent will probably be the way to go. The other side of the coin is what if things go wrong, right? And if you look at it from an employer perspective, and in particular termination, how does that work compared to other countries in Europe? Pedro mentioned before as well. Bridging operates in in multiple countries in Europe. As an example, we have Portugal and France, which are less flexible than Spain when it comes to termination. Um, and to give you a bit more detail in terms of what possible routes are out there for potential termination, we've seen this become increasingly relevant for customers that we're working with, mostly because at some point things don't work out. Um, there's a change of plans, or simply you are readjusting your capacity in Spain because you're hiring in other geographies across Europe or even outside Europe. So these kind of become day-to-day topics that we find useful, at least to have an idea on what to do. Um, so, starting from the top, disciplinary basically is for extreme situations where there's negligence, um, underperformance, and stuff like that. Of course, this has a process behind, a documented process. This is what I mean. And that's why, in the end, if there's something that can be attributable to the employee, then there's no compensation. As you go down the list, you can see that there is compensation. This has to do with the type of route we're taking or dismissal. And maybe jumping to the last, unfair, which is the other extreme, to give an idea of, a walkthrough of what this would be. Let's say that there's, a situation where you let an employee go. Um, a few weeks later, we find out that this dismissal was unfair. There's a process for the employee to come back and claim that that in the end, he shouldn't have, or she shouldn't have been let go, and then this would carry an indemnity which is roughly 1 month per year of contract. There's some caps as well, which is common in Spain. Pedro was talking about social security cap before, so it's good in a way because not only you can predict what would be a potential budget for situations where things don't go as you would expect, and beyond that, there's also a cap, right? If you have an employee in your payroll, in your team, that has been with you for a long time, it's not that the liability goes exponentially and ultimately uncapped as you have in other places around Europe. So this kind of gives you predictability and reasonability as well around the amounts and the packages that you're facing, when an employee is being dismissed. There's some cases, not very common, but if employees involve courts, and if there's an actual dispute, legal dispute, not through negotiation or anything, where you could be forced to reinstate this employee. This is also not unheard of in other places around Europe. So again, a bit more flexible, but still some liability. And of course, when you look back at other places, in the first and I guess the best example is the US, where everything is a bit more flexible. If the parties are happy, they stay together. If not, you go separate ways, employer and employee. Whereas in Spain, it's more aligned, of course, with the European way, and it offers a bit of protection. Uh, so moving on and jumping into services, I guess this is to be expected. So Bridging works around everything employment related. There's different setups. Pedro was talking about how Spain could be a destination for foreign companies, or Portugal or other places in Europe. So I guess the first service and the more, I guess, relevant at an initial stage is how you build your team, right? Like we make the decision of opening a team or a tech hub or whatever that might be, right? Because we have a new customer in the area or the region. It doesn't even need to be Spain. As we were talking before, about the relationship with Europe and other places, namely Central and South America, because of the language similarities. And also, even in Africa, you have the same idea with farmer colonies, or um, because of the commercial transactions between countries. You could even have a team in Spain to support, for example, a region which is not Europe or Spain, right? In particular, so it could be we have customers in Argentina. We have a team specifically built for that purpose. So the first, I guess, question comes how you build that team. Pedro talked a bit about that. Basically, what we help with is not only sharing benchmarks, building offers, understanding how the local market works, and potentially what are the costs involved, and even sourcing candidates as we were talking about before. Um, but ultimately, we just want to make sure that the process is successful, and we do it side by side or in parallel with other initiatives like internal initiatives, external partners doing the same thing. So we're all for outcome and not so much how you do it. So we're an extra hand to try and build your team. Um, the second kind of question, which is not exactly building your team, but if let's say someone is relocating, coming back home, um, relocating in particular to lead this new team that you're building, then we get into all these new set of concerns, which is visas, resident permits. Are there any tax benefits for these people, which are very common across Europe? And basically, our role there is not only assist with the paperwork to get the permit and the visa out of the way, but also guide through what is the optimal setup in terms of taxes, so it is efficient both for the company and of course the employees relocating. Um, and ultimately, if there's any um, requirements around the different steps that you need to follow. And I'm thinking about the Beckham Law, which has, of course, each country has its own program and requirements, and they might be in essence the same idea, but they differ. So all of these different technicalities and requirements, we are there to support, and of course, make sure that in the end things work out. Looking at a company perspective in the different ways you can kind of set up. Towards the right, you can see employer of record, and then on the lower side of the screen, soft landing, company as a service, and foreign employer. In essence, they serve the same, I guess, issue, which is employing your team in a foreign place. In this case, we're talking about Spain. So, let's say that you're looking at one person relocating ahead of everyone else, or ahead of building a team, and you just want a quick solution to be able to employ this person and ultimately pay a salary, offer a work contract, benefits, whatever the case might be. Employer of record is an easy um, you know plug and play solution, in the sense that you don't need to set up anything. It's all done under Bridgen's umbrella of companies. So ultimately, we are doing this work on your behalf. A bit different would be soft landing, which you actually are incorporating a company ahead of employing someone. And in this case, it could be a subsidiary of the company back home. It could be a separate entity, but ultimately you have a permanent establishment in the country. And of course, with that, other things, right? Like insurance, bank accounts, all the regulatory framework around medical appointments, health and safety, all of these things that under the employer of record that we were just talking about before, this is already done ahead of time, and there's no setup needed. And a third option, if you look at the bottom right corner, is foreign employer, which is kind of in between of the two we just mentioned, which is you don't actually incorporate the company. You are not also using a structure which is external to you, which would be employer of record, but you only register in the country for the purpose of processing payroll and everything around payroll, right? So all the HR admin, onboarding, offboarding, the relationship with tax authorities, social security. So basically, this is an extension of the company, let's say in Germany or in the US or in the UK, where you interact with the government and your presence in Spain is done using the headquarters information. So in the end, the setups can vary slightly, but it serves the same purpose or the same goal, which is having a platform and a structure to be able to provide employment contracts, benefits, and so on and so forth. Um, Moving on, this is a bit of what we've seen happening and what we've been working with our customers. So as we were talking about the different, I guess, services before, there's a bit of a story and journey, if you want, complementarity about the services we were talking about, which is it potentially doesn't make sense to set up an entity from day one, go through the whole admin process, which is also costly in terms of time, financially as well. And then you get to a point where 1, 2, 3 months have gone by and you're stuck on these things. Um, so what we've seen working well is start building capacity, get that team together, relocate that first person, which is key to set up the office locally, and worry about potentially set up your own entity before afterwards, when you have critical mass, you've had a bit of time to also adjust to what the local regulations are. um, it also at some point it makes sense because of uh, the size, exposure, and also you get that good feeling of things are going well, so let's take the next step. And with that comes more liability as well. And what I'm trying to say is you can start small, build your team, employ it through Bridge-in, which is employer of record. Of course, before that, we have potential relocation or even hiring, as we were discussing before. And once you get to a place where there's relevance, it's working out, UR potentially doesn't serve your goal anymore because you want specific benefits, specific contract types. You want to apply to grants, for example. You want your own bank account, so employees are pay their salaries through your own bank account and not a third party. Then at some point it makes sense to actually move to your own entity. We assist with this transition as well, so setting up, building this critical mass, and then internalizing the team after creating the entity for you. um, so going towards the end, we just wanted to have a bit of a explanation around how you set up a company. This is often a source of questions. As I was saying before, when we're working under an EOR kind of model or umbrella, this is not of anyone's concern. It's already there, it's already set up. So this actually becomes a question when you're setting up your own entity. A few pointers in terms of requirements, minimum standards in Spain. Talking about capital, for example, it's 3,000 when you compare it with other places where in some cases it's even €1 per shareholder. In Spain, there's a minimum requirement of 3K. I guess office is a bit the same everywhere. You can have a physical office or a virtual. Virtual is not a PO box, is potentially a service CoWorks would provide, or similar solutions, which basically they're handling mail, potentially even have rooms for companies working remotely or remotely first, and basically it serves the purpose of getting mail from the government and potentially other things that might be important, but ultimately it's mandatory to have an address. Directors, I guess, also very similar to other countries in Europe. There's different structures. You can have one director or more. Depending on the company type, there might be a board as well or not, or just a management body. And also, the managing director being Spanish or not, doesn't need to be a resident. Um, but ultimately, he or she needs to be registered in Spain for the purpose of being a managing director as a non-resident tax-wise. And this basically is getting a tax number, which is the NIE. It usually takes a bit of time, but it can be done remotely, which helps. So you don't need to go in person to Spain. Um, but this is probably, we even left a note. It's probably the longest step in this process. And then, moving towards the later stages of the process, there's a company name that needs to be chosen and approved. Typically, you submit a couple of options to the government so they can check if the names are already used or if there's any infringement in terms of register. And everything being ready, these things we talked about, capital, shareholders, office, directors, the name, then you can incorporate, and this is the easiest or fastest way to do things, through a notary. Again, going back to what we were discussing before, we handle these things on your behalf through power of attorney, so you don't need to come in person. And ultimately, so you have an idea of costs, there's government fees associated with the process, and also a bit of notary fees. So top of mind for a typical limited liability company, share capital within reasonable amounts and not too many shareholders or complex structures. We're looking at around €1,000. Not coming in person adds the notary cost of producing a power of attorney and all of that, so it's a bit more. But ultimately, this is the process. And of course, after the company is open, there's a bit of post-incorporation tasks. And this is basically, opening a bank account, and of course, then building the internal HR capacity, insurances, and stuff like that. So, last note, a bit of a team. It's been a while, I guess. What's that? Over 6 years now. And we're now almost 30 people, a lot of different faces from different countries and even continents. This has been, I guess, the base for our success, diversity, different knowledge, which is very useful when we're working with different geographies, customers a bit from all over the world as well. So that's why we kind of went down that path as well. This is the team that has been and is supporting, I guess, all the customers we work with. And back to you, Pedro.
Yeah, just thanks, Nick. And just to wrap it up, I think the key thing to take away here is Spain does present itself as a stable democracy with a high human development index. So, it's a stable country to operate in a continent under European Union. It does have that interesting location that it is attractive to talent in Europe a lot of times, and we've seen this multiple times, people relocating from North Europe to Southern Europe, and Spain is one of the great options in Southern Europe. But also that historical ties with the Americas, with Latam, that speaks Spanish as well. It is same time zone as Central Europe, so most of the European Union will be the exact same time zone. Then in terms of talent, it is a big country. It does have a lot of talent. It does have, good universities and all of that. And in terms of culture, it is Western culture, and so welcoming by nature. Maybe some of you never did business in Spain, but I'm assuming most might have visited. So you'll speak this from your own experience, and there's a lot of that to offer. So if you haven't considered, maybe you have, and that's why you're here joining. But Spain can indeed present a very good option for you to either expand or relocate, either individually or at your company. To wrap up, and I see we have some questions, so we'll start tackling those. But Feel free to scan the QR code on the screen if you want to get in touch, or just email us at hello@bridgein.com, or even visit us at bridgein.com. So we'll jump right into the questions. I see a lot of uh, ones. So let's start with this one. We are looking for at EOR for Spain, but someone mentioned that the non-resident company set up as safer legally wise. What is the difference? Which is quicker, cheaper? So by quickest, it is the EOR for sure. Cheapest, you know, since it really depends on the size. But then you also probably don't want to do for an employer for a big team. Typically, you pay a fixed fee per person. For an employer, differs, usually still the same. It, I guess for an employer could be cheaper for a big team, but you probably then don't want to have for an employer. And why not? Because essentially of permanent establishment risk. You need to be very careful about that. To which point certain activities are being performed in a country, like sales activities, like decision strategic, you have what it is deemed as permanent establishment, meaning that you need to have a company. You actually need to incorporate. And the reason is simple: local government wants to collect tax on you. Okay. The other thing that Nikitas haven't mentioned that I think is relevant here as well is a foreign employer setup, in a way, in terms of risk, it might be the worst. Why? Because it's an extension. It is not a separate entity, and you would get a separate entity either by using a EOR, which is a actual de facto separate entity, or by using a subsidiary, which is a different legal entity. In either of those, if there's any dispute, any issue regarding employment, the liability tends to say on that entity. But if you're using it for an employer, everything goes back to the home company. So, and that might not be optimal for some of you. So it is important to understand those nuances. Obviously, every company is slightly different, but it's not like the easiest by far is EOR. For an employer, might make sense in a few scenarios, but it might also carry a little bit more risk. And actually, the setup is almost like incorporating a company. Okay, because you do need to have a lot of the registration with that. Hopefully, that helps. So, next one. Do we need to be physically present in Spain at any point to expand there, or can be everything done remotely? So, we are very used to use power of attorney to be able to do everything, and including the NIE that needs to be done, if I'm not mistaken, at the police stations, can be done with the power of attorney. Usually, the only trouble to get things done remotely are the banks. The banks are usually very traditional in that. So we can then do all incorporation totally remote. We usually still advise, if possible, because it does simplify here and there. If you can just, sometimes go in and sign things at the bank. Some banks are more digitized and work with them. There's obviously fintech and neobanks as well that can be options, but depending on the bank, sometimes a local presence might be relevant. Anything here to add, Nikitas, that I missed?
No, I think that's spot on. The banks are usually the the exception, and ultimately we've seen cases where we try to do it remotely, but in the end, it's just easier to fly in and do it. It probably will take a day instead of taking several weeks or even months. So definitely, I would say it's the only part where it would make sense to come in person.
Yeah, and still on that, let me also add the fact that um, Europe, obviously, there's a lot of regulations, both from the European Central Bank and then the regulators at the national level. And one of the things that I guess it's very, heard every time is the need to identify the ultimate beneficiaries. And so sometimes what we see as some trouble is at the bank level, if you have a company that has a very complex owning structure, that it might be owned by funds of funds, so really deep ownership table, and you're not showing up to open the bank account, folks at the bank might not like feel super happy. And so let's face it might not be efficient, but the reality is a lot of times in Southern Europe, showing up, shaking hands, still carries some weight, right? The governmental, like we said, works for everything that is incorporating, but there's a few things that eventually that might be present. Anyway, moving to the next one, could you give me more info on the talent pool size and compare it with other European markets? So, well, I don't want to speak by memory, but Spain, in terms of population, is one of the biggest countries in Europe, right? So you should expect, and they are, I believe, four times, if I'm not mistaken, Portugal. So things are aligned with that, right? So if you go with countries like Poland or Romania or Germany or France, all big countries, they are, I guess, fairly comparable. If you go to smaller countries, then Spain has more. So it's really the size of the country and the amount of population in the country. Depending on the skills you're looking for, that might be slightly variations on that. But the fact is, in terms of engineering and STEM, it is very spread out. I think all over Europe, right? There's good universities. Spain has a ton of universities on talent, business schools as well. So it's on top of the biggest countries in Europe for sure. Hopefully that clarifies, Clarissa. Okay, next one from David. You mentioned that terminating contracts is more flexible in Spain than in Portugal. What does that look like in practice? I'll leave this to you, Nikitas.
Um, yeah, so when you look at it um, from a practical perspective in Portugal, under a permanent contract, you're very limited in terms of options on how to terminate. Um, and I'm talking about Portugal because it gives you an idea how different Spain is. So you'd potentially need to sit with the employee and negotiate through a mutual termination agreement rather than actually dismissing somebody. Of course, there's exceptions in the law, and negligence plays a role, and it has a specific procedure, as well with other things like restructuring, um, even bankruptcy. If the roles stop to existing, so let's say that you decide not to have any salespeople anymore in the country. Um, so in Spain, it's more flexible in the sense that either it's an objective reason, which is these, I guess, well-defined reasons, and you can pay those 20 days to the employee and you let them go, or even if you want to do it unilaterally as an employer, and that's, I guess, the big difference. You have that possibility, and then not only there's a well-established amount in the law, which are the 33 days, which is roughly 1 month per year of contract, and there's also a cap on that, which is 24 months of compensation. So in the end, you don't reach an agreement. There's no obvious path or negligence for a specific termination. You can always go that route where you terminate unilaterally, and then if the employee feels this is not, which we talked about before in the slides, if this is not a fair process, they can claim and they get access to the severance package we were talking about.
All right, thank you. So, next one, can a founder act as director of the Spanish subsidiary without relocating to Spain? Absolutely yes. So, not require at all to be a resident. So, that's an easy one, Paul. Okay, moving to the next. What are the most common mistakes company make when hiring in Spain for the first time? So, I think this is broadly any time that you're hiring in a country that it might not be the country that you are currently operating, or might not be, it might be done this to expand, is the local cultural mapping. You really need to understand, how the local business, the companies, the skills, the shortcomings, and it's you really need to have some inside information. I can give you, very quick example. So, Brigitte started in Portugal. I'm based in Portugal. Well, actually, to the previous account, I'm the managing director of our Spanish entity, and I'm not there. So, yeah, that also confirms the previous one. But talking about talent, my background is in computer science, so I know pretty much almost all relevant IT and tech product companies in Portugal, and you have that inside information about which companies have good practices, which companies have less so, which companies that anyone that passes their recruitment process must be good, and that is tremendous insight in making sure that you can hire good people, right? Because when you look at the candidate CV, you recognize the companies and you know how good or bad pedigree that might be, and obviously that only goes so far, but it is a good insider information. So trying to hire people on a country that you don't know without any local experience, trying to do that with the recruitment team back home, it is just spending time to get very low results. So I would recommend not doing that. The cultural mapping, the local experience, and then something else that, quite honestly, at Virgin is a huge differentiator. We have virtually close to zero rejections on hiring offers that we work with our customers to prepare. Okay, so and that's tremendously relevant, right? Because you invested all this time, you searched someone, you selected someone, you interviewed, you liked someone, you prepare an offer, and then they reject, right? It is a big waste of time for everyone involved. So getting those offers accepted, it is tremendously important. And the reason why we've been helping our customers get them approved is because we help them do a very good qualification in terms of a fair, benchmark, but also understand why is the candidate applying, right? We know if the company he is in potentially might be laying off, or if going through some financial struggles or whatever may be. So all of that insight enables companies to really be successful when hiring. And I would highly, bridging or not bridging, but I would highly recommend that you work with someone that is experienced in the market.
A good complement to that, Pedro, is actually not wanting to name names, but there's a very well-known case of a company, a European company, scale up unicorn status that moved to Portugal. They kind of force fit their culture into the recruitment process in Portugal and into building the office. Um, and ultimately, a few months later, they decided to shut everything down. And I think this ties back really well to what Pedro was saying. Aside from um, the potential technicalities around contracts or super specific benefits, of course those matter when you're making an offer, but also the way you conduct your your recruitment process, so the interviews and technical assessments, all of these things can demotivate and ultimately undermine the work you're trying to do, and it's a waste of time. So I think that's a very good example of how important it is to have somebody on your side, which basically gives you that local knowledge as if you know, were living in the place, you're living in that country in the first place.
Yep. So, from Beth, how much involvement do you need to have as a company, or do you handle everything? Well, Beth, I think you'll love to hear that. Yes, we handle everything, anything regarding your compliance and regulatory stuff. It's still your business to manage. We don't focus on business development or any of that. Obviously, it's your company, but from payroll, work contracts, HR admin in terms of registry with Social Security, insurances, help you understand provisions in work contracts, the risks with work contracts, the termination liability. Then, if you're going with want to have your own your own company, the accounting associated with that. So it's really everything, and this is pretty much our mission at Bridging is to take care of bureaucracy so that business owners and entrepreneurs can focus on building the business not on filling paperwork and red tape. So yeah, we do pretty much handle everything on that front. Beckham Law. So from Evelyn, we've heard that the Beckham Law is going to be cancelled. Any insight, Nikitas?
Yeah, not really. I guess this is an easy one as well. Still in place, and even from a practical perspective, applications are accepted and are approved within reasonable timeframes. So there's no concerns there. There are some cases where even if the programs are not cancelled, um, we have then hurdles at the admin level where you can apply, but then it's not approved, or you can't even apply because there's a specific window where they're not accepting applications. So none of these, I guess, operational concerns, nor at a higher level politically, programs being cancelled.
Yeah, and I guess we could add there that Portugal also had and still has a program called EFICI, right? But it was called
Yeah.
before NHR, non-habitual resident, and it is a little bit stricter. So sometimes I think people might feel that Beckham is also going away because of what happened in Portugal. But there are different countries, obviously, slightly variations in the program. And the thing is, even if in Portugal, let's face it, today administratively is a little bit harder to get speed and get things done. The program still exists. Some additional limitations, right? But it still exists, right? So, and this is something that we see time and time again. A lot of people, again, I don't want to focus always on the same thing, but it is a big part of what we do is talking with companies and individuals relocating and obviously wanting to benefiting from beneficial tax regimes as they relocate into Southern Europe. So pretty much our bread and butter.
Yeah, the
Um,
Beckham Law, just to finalize, the rate remains the same, so 24% on income tax, flat rate for a number of years. Um, and also the I'm missing the word, but the salary requirement. So the amount of salary an employee needs to be paid to be able to qualify, which is 56K. And of course, as the salary grows, the benefit grows as well because it's a percentage, even if it's a flat and not progressive as the usual regime. So both of those requirements are the same and still apply. So no changes there either.
Yeah, and what we should say there, and we actually talked before about the cap on the Social Security contribution. And so, what you can have with both the Social Security cap and the Beckham Law in Spain is effectively it is a very good country if you have, a C-suite executive relocating because a higher salary it does not get overburdened by taxes as much as most other countries, right? So that is probably one of the best things that Spain has to offer. Obviously the country, the life, the experience, but that cap, that done things planned properly, the liabilities in terms of taxation does not continue to grow exponentially. Okay, we have 2 minutes and two questions, so we can probably cover both. Let's go. So from Lorena, virtual office is accepted as registered address. Is that really enough, or does it cause issues in practice? As far as I know, no issues, right?
No, I mean there's the practicality of getting snail mail, and that's why an office is required. Of course, from a legal perspective, the company has to have a place, a physical place, and again, not a mailbox like we used to have back in the day in other countries in Europe. Um, and I'm thinking I'm looking up north, but basically it works. There's no practical issues as long as it's a physical address.
All right, and last one, just in time from Jacinto. How long does it full process take from deciding to expand to have the first employee hired and compliant? Well, I guess it depends on how you want to have it. The fastest, as we discussed, is employee of record, right? So that is, 1 week. If you are in a rush, maybe a few days. It's just a matter really of having the agreement signed with the company doing the OR, if it says, and then prepare the work contracts, collect personal information, put on the contract, and start. So it is not realistic to decide next Monday, and by Monday of the following week, the employee is starting with a work contract. We've done, even in terms of emergency, 48-hour onboarding, right? So we are capable of doing that. Now, if you're going to foreign employer or wanting to create a subsidiary, you need to add several weeks. The precise time will depend a little bit on, you know, the interesting thing is the government speed. You might think that is the slowest thing that is delaying you, but often it is not. It is your ability to produce some documentation. Yes, documentation asked by the government, but particularly if you are not a local citizen, you are not a resident, you're not recognized by the Spanish government, you need to make you recognized, right? You need to, if you're either the owner or the managing director. And then if the owner is a foreign company, we need to make that company recognized. So all of that requires, paperwork, sometimes translation, certification. That tends to be the thing that depends. So depends a little bit, but to incorporate a company, weeks. To onboard through your days. All right, we are about time. We got good fortune to cover all the questions. Hopefully, this was helpful for everyone. We'll continue to have these webinars, so feel free to join us and follow us on social media in our website. We'll keep on having them. Hopefully, you found today's session relevant and interesting. And thanks you for joining. Have a nice rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.